Will Deion Sanders one day be the Florida State head coach or maybe even an NFL head coach?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with the big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today is the show I've been preparing to do for months. Deion Sanders, who is he? What is he going to become? And, quite frankly, will he ever be the Florida State head football coach? I'm going to answer a lot of those questions in this podcast and more, including where I think he will end up long term. Before I get to that point, here are a couple key points that I want to go over about Sanders from the time he was small until now. Number one, where he grew up and why that's really influential for Florida State and many other college football programs, what he's done as a player, how myself and other people really began to revere him, and then finally, his coaching career. It's gotten off to a pretty fast start at the college level, but there are a lot of things to look at and what he could or could not do to this point and how that projects. So without further ado, I'm going to break down him from a personal standpoint and then just the basics. Number one, he's in his 50s. He was born in the 1967, August 9th. This is a guy that's 57 years old. I mean, he's not over the hill as a coach, but he's not somebody that's brand new to it. He's not too young. I think the 50s are about the perfect time for a coach because you've been around enough ball. There isn't much you haven't seen, but you're not so old that you don't want to get out on the recruiting trail or you don't want to mess around with hiring coaches. You don't want to deal with younger people. He is in what I would call the happy medium. So here are a few other things about him. He grew up in North Fort Myers, that area where he was from. The neighborhood was really tough. They even had a jail like in his neighborhood because there was so much crime. And I'm not exaggerating. There was a special about this a number of years ago about his upbringing. It was really hard. His mother raised him. He had a stepfather that was very influential, but his true dad, from what I remember, he was a guy that wasn't around, had a lot of problems, drugs, etc. He even gambled on his kid when he was in like Little League and stuff about how many yards he'd get. Deion, everybody knew from the time he was very young, was a elite athlete. He used to bet on his kids' Little League games. So allegedly, that's pretty crazy. But he's seen everything growing up, and it made him hungry. Do not forget that fact for this show. Deion knew what it was like to struggle. He saw the people around him, and he used it as leverage later on as he was one of the most motivated guys on and off the gridiron. That's very, very important for his coaching career as well. As a player for Florida State, he was there from 85 through 88. He had 14 interceptions. He had 126 punt returns. He was just as good, if not better, at punt returns, honestly, than he was at corner. And he was a two-time consensus All-American as a corner. So put that in perspective. He had 3 punt returns for a touchdown. When he was coming out of high school, he was so good in Florida. He was recruited by everybody. Obviously, Bowden got him to come to Florida State. And later on, the state of Florida named him one of the top 33 players in high school football history for the Sunshine State. That is quite the honor. So again, from the time Deion was small, this is a guy that lived it and breathed it. The game of football was important. However, he was great in track. He could play basketball at pickup. I've seen him in a dunk competition. And this is a guy that was drafted in the 6th round by the Kansas City Royals. He was an all-state baseball player. Didn't sign the contract there, but he ended up going to the Yankees organization, etc. While he was going through football. And some of you may not know this, he ended up being a big-time player for the Atlanta Braves at one point in their playoff runs. He was just as good an athlete as you're ever going to see. All of that built this persona. For those of us that lived it, like he's a few years older than I am. I'm 51, so he's 6 years older. I remember watching him as a player at Florida State. I remember him on draft day. I remember the 40 times he ran 4.27, 4.29 at the draft. He was the guy that had an image that was different. And he was very brash. He was very talkative. Sometimes he probably spoke more than he should, but he backed up most of what he said pretty quickly. The most funny story about him in the combine that I remember, He went to Indy. He ran the 40. Then he got back on the plane and left. He didn't think he needed to do anything else. Well, considering he went, I believe it was 5th overall to the Falcons, that obviously worked out pretty well. He ended up getting 2 Super Bowl rings with the Cowboys and with the 49ers in 94. Then he signed with the Cowboys the next year and helped them win the Super Bowl in 95. So he's been successful there. He's a Hall of Famer. All of it. I mean, there's just an incredible background to look at. You just can't stress enough how important it was for him to have those combinations. He didn't have a natural father figure, but one came into his life that helped. Then he had Bowden, who was a tremendous father figure to a lot of guys that were from single mom situations or didn't have a normal in-home situation. And I think that influenced him because Deion has done a lot of that while he's at Colorado, and I'll get to that later in the show. I think he's done a great job with it. And he's also a guy that's been around different places. He's lived all over the United States. Besides the Niners and Cowboys, he played with the Redskins at that time. And he played with the Ravens back in that time. So he played East Coast, he played West Coast, and he played in the state of Texas. He's lived in Texas. He's lived in Mississippi, obviously grew up in Florida. There's nothing that he really hasn't seen, high school, college, or pro. Because like his nickname says, Prime, Coach Prime is somebody that has been across the country constantly and been in the limelight. He really wouldn't know what to do probably if he went into a restaurant with a buddy or one of his kids and sat down and nobody came up to him and asked him for an autograph. I'm guessing he doesn't even try to do that very much, if at all. But to that point, my few brief interactions with him a number of years ago, this was over a decade ago at Under Armour events, always personable, always in the moment coaching, very much a person that was competitive no matter how small a task it was. He didn't care what the recruit's name was, what his ranking was, the kids he was working with. Either you paid attention to what was going on right there, he's going to let you know. He did not care. Saw him do it numerous times, and when I'd ask him about somebody, he had a direct answer on who, what, when, where, and why. A to B. When he was in a coaching moment, it's a little bit different. I mean, he was a nice guy, easy to get along with and all that, but when somebody from the media asks him something, here's why this happens. The best story I could tell you about the recruiting stuff when I was there, I'll never forget this. This is hilarious. Off the cuff, he had a kid that was a little bit brash like him at the combine or at the Under Armour practices for their all-star game. And somebody said something to him because he got smoked on a play. They were just doing some 7-on-7. I think they were in cover 3. I can't remember. It was a basic zone defense. And he failed at his assignment, and the guy scored. Wasn't man. He turned him loose, guy scores. Deion says something to him about it, asked him a question, whatever it was. And the kid turned and barked back at him, like blew it off like it wasn't his fault. And immediately, this is hilarious. Deion says, son, they gave me the gold jacket. I didn't ask for it. Now you need to listen to me. And I was just like, that is hilarious. Like he was standing 5 feet from me when he said it. I was just like, that is hilarious. Because it's true. The National Football League does not hand out the gold NFL Hall of Fame jackets by accident. He knows the coverages. He knows why. And he's a film junkie. He's a guy that understands who, what, when, where, and why, who got beat, technique, was it speed, was it a bad match, whatever it is. Again, if you ask him something, he can tell you. So I thought that was funny. And the kid that was brash, shut up. That was one of the greatest lines I've ever heard in a conversation to end a quote-unquote dispute. Not that there really was one. The player in question failed at it. But high school career as a coach, once he got done with everything, he actually started coaching when he lived in Dallas, started Prime Prep. That was for a couple of years, 2012 and 13. 2015 and 16, it was AAA. 2017 to 2020, it was Trinity Christian. He was the OC there. So he got his start with that. And then he went to Jackson State in the state of Mississippi. And to be honest, I didn't know what to expect. It's a historical black college. I knew he'd get talent there, but I had no idea, nor did anybody else. How do you do with recruiting? How do you handle media? You're in an area you're not familiar with, all these things. He did pretty well. I mean, they were 27-6 for what I can gather. Turned the program around. They weren't great. Obviously, got Travis Hunter to go there, Shador to go there. That helped. But again, recruiting's key. Can't recruit your own kid if you can't recruit elite players, although I'm still shocked they got Travis. is the bottom line in recruiting. I say it all the time. 80% of winning in college football is recruiting. It's the same at the FCS or historical black schools. No different. Best team usually wins regardless of the man on the sidelines with a headset. So Deion proved that. When I come back, I'm going to start discussing his timeline at the University of Colorado, the last couple of years, some of the things that I think are interesting, especially on the offensive ball. That is next here on Locked on Seminoles. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for the super fans like us, the fans who were first in the parking lot and the last ones to leave. We see you. So with that in mind, I know Florida State fans aren't necessarily the most excited about football right now, but that's why I'm talking about Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, and all these different coaching candidates. You can look up all the different pods on Locked on Seminoles. It's a lot of fun for me, and I know it is for you as well. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com. Shipped nationwide. Colorado is 8-2 at the time that I'm doing this recording. A lot of people, myself included, didn't expect them to be that great because I thought they would struggle in the trenches. I'm going to get into more specifics about that here in a second. But at 8-2, they have blown away like what FanDuel and everybody else had for their over-under on wins. It was anywhere from like 4.5 to 6, depending on when and which company you would look at. But they've went way past that. So congrats to them first and foremost. Deion helped put together the staff to make it happen. The players are getting better, and the stats I'm going to go over are going to bear that out. And I'm going to use 23 and 24 stats, just compare on what they've done offensively. Since he's a defensive guy, he played corner. He did play some receiver for the Cowboys, by the way. He played both ways in the NFL, too. He's still more of a defensive guy. I just find it interesting that their offense has shaped itself the way that it has. And these numbers are really intriguing. So first, I'm going to read 23 number, then the same area, I'll read 2024. Rushing, last year, they were terrible at it. 68.9, 133rd. And this year, they're not much better, to be honest. 77 yards a game, 133rd. But why? Well, he's got Shador. They don't have a great offensive line to run the ball, but he's got a great quarterback who's got an incredible mind. So they leaned on it. Last year, 294.7. That was 16th. This year, 322.2. That is up to number 7 in the FBS. Total offense, 363.6 last year, 82nd. This year, 399.2. Pretty big improvement, up to number 56. Scoring, 28.2 last year. That was 60th. And this year, 34.1. That's 26th. Again, I mean, they're up 34 spots. Give them some props. Last year, for the entire season, they had 45 passes of 20 or more yards. That was 52nd. This year, they're to 45 already, and they're only 10 games in. That's really impressive. That's 9th currently. When you look at the 20-yard runs, this is where they struggle again. They just don't run the football very well. They only had 6 runs of 20 or more yards. That was 125th. They've got 5 this year, so they're basically on the exact same pace. That's 129th. Third downs. This is something that I thought would be very intriguing. A lot of coaches that are new struggle in this area. They haven't been too bad at it. Third down, 68 of 174 last year, 39.1. That's 64. Considering what their offensive line situation was, that's better than I anticipated. This year, the line's a little bit better, but they've also still improved. You got to use the talent you have. 54 of 131 so far this year, 41.2%. They are number 60. Turnovers for the entire year last year, especially his first year in the FBS, this is a great sign. Only 11 turnovers for his offense. That was 10th in the nation. That might have impressed me the most out of all his stats. They've got 12 so far this year. That's 44th. They should probably improve on that. But I also think they're taking a few more chances because they've got more depth at receiver, etc. Shador's throwing it downfield, and they can make a few mistakes, but they're also living with those because they're hitting more big plays. Far as penalties, this is the one area that above all else, if anything else you're going to take from today, is my biggest concern. It's not the O-line. It's not recruiting. It's something I discovered today while looking at stats. Penalties last year and this year, a major problem. They had 107 last year in 2023, 8.9 per game. Out of 133 teams last year, they were 132nd. That's god awful. This year, they're averaging 7.5 a game, so it's down 1.4, and they have 75 overall through 10 games, but that's still 113th. They're not a disciplined football team. Remember, he hasn't been at the FBS level for more than 2 years, this second year. He's only been a head coach in some capacity for a handful of years. I'm not shocked by this number, but it's still not what you want to see. It is, to me, the biggest concern. Red zone, 28 of 38 last year, they were elite. It's so shocking that they were good at it because of the penalties and the lack of the O-line. But again, 28 out of 38, 73.7% that were touchdown, not scoring. Only red zone number I use is touchdown percentage. Field goals you can throw out the window. I don't want to hear about that. How many times did you enter the red zone, or how many touchdowns did you score? Give me the percent. Where do you rank? They're ranking, again, 12th in the nation, 73.7% last year. Not quite as good this season, but it's still pretty darn good. 27 out of 40 so far, 67.5%, 37th nationally. One-score games. This is something else when you talk about coaching that is important. I forget which team it was last year, but he even admitted after the game that was on me. He blew an opportunity when he should or should not have used a timeout. That is something he needs to work on. He's gotten better at it this year, but it's still something to think about. Again, experience is important. One-score games last year, 3-5. This year, he's 2-1. They have more talent this season, so they should be better at it. But notice that the number is lower just in general. That's because they're smoking teams a lot of the time. And we're going to get to the who, what, when, where, and why in a second, but that's still a good sign overall that they're 2-1. If you get more talent, you should utilize it. They are. Sacks allowed. This is something to think about because it's very unique for Colorado. When he got there, that place was a disaster as far as a roster, and nothing takes longer from a positional standpoint to develop than offensive line. Disaster. He knew that it wasn't going to work just to go get the elite high school kids because it takes 2 to 3 years, no matter what the ranking is as a general rule, to be a dude. Usually. So, or even be, to be honest, moderate. He's went to the portal for the most part. He did get Seaton, a great left tackle, played at IMG last year, and he started at left tackle. So they've improved a little, but these numbers still are leaving a lot to be desired. Again, there are 133 teams in the FBS. Last year, they gave up 56 sacks. I mean, Old Dominion, I believe, was the only one worse. They're 132nd. This year, they're 120th by giving up 32 so far. 2 points. Again, they don't have a lot of continuity because they got so many new bodies. And Tude Shador, while a very good passer, tends to hold on to the ball a long time. That's just the nature of him. Sometimes you live with it and you're happy, and sometimes you're like, oh boy, because you got to get rid of the football, especially when you get 5 and 6 men coming after you. I don't care who's blocking. I don't care if it's the 76 Steelers. You're still going to have some concerns. That being stated, they're pretty good up front compared to where they were last year. And I know they still got a long way to go, but that, again, that is coaching. So I think that's a really good sign for his future. When I come back, I've got a whole bunch of questions. Part of it is recruiting. Part of it is going to surprise people in regards to why I think he can be extremely successful. I have changed my opinion on him a lot, just based on what they've done this year, and I'm going to define that next here on Locked On Seminoles. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This show is also brought to you by Game Time. Have you downloaded the Game Time app yet? If you have not, you should, because it's one of the most convenient apps that I've ever used. And you can also filter out a lot of the fluff with Game Time Picks. It allows you not only to look at stuff, but to get the incredible deals faster because it takes care of all the wading through that you don't have to mess with. So here's an example. You can go into the app and you can pick Florida State's home game against Florida that's coming up, not this weekend, but next. You can see what the prices are on different tickets, or you can just go through and browse something like college football games and do the same thing. So make sure that you check out Game Time because it's an easy way to find the game that you want, wherever you want, fast and easy. It's also an opportunity to look for plays, to look for movies, to look for anything. It doesn't have to be basketball, it doesn't have to be football or a sport. It is across all kinds of different genres. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Where do I think Deion Sanders is going to end up and why? Well, to get there, you got to ask a lot of questions, and some of it's subjective, but some of it does have a history that gives some points to the really key thing. So I wrote down a series of questions that I think most people would be interested in, myself included, and I'm going to give my own feedback. For those of you that watch this on YouTube, please comment. I'm curious of what you think. But again, this is just based on years of history, following him, getting to see him coach live, getting to see how he's developed as a recruiter, as a coach, everything else all in one spot. So the biggest question that I get, or the conversations that I've been a part of, would he rely on, let's say he goes to Florida State after Norvell's gone, would he rely too much on the portal? I say no. And here's why. Colorado's a different deal. It's a state with not that much talent compared to, even a state like Mississippi. Per capita, it's great, but it's not very populated. They still have a lot more talent than Colorado. Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Pennsylvania, California, any of those states, that's a whole nother animal. Like if he became the head coach at UCLA, he'd find a way to make that a really prosperous scenario. He just would. High school kids will relate to him. He's proven it through the portal. There's still kids that are only a year or two out of the portal or out of the high school ranks. I don't think it'd be that big a difference. And I also think the following rule is going to be very big for him. It's coincidence, but it's massive. For those of you that do not know, Deion had a surgery not long ago. He had to have part of his foot removed. He doesn't get around as well as he used to. And to date, he had been doing a whole lot of in-home visits, so I'm told. Well, the NCAA has changed the national signing date to December 4th, or each year, the first Wednesday in December. There are no more in-home visits for that. And like 99% of the kids sign with the first signing date. The second one is first Wednesday in February, but there's hardly anybody left. There'll be some in-homes in January for the kids that enroll in summer that you can do, but they're already signed, and there's maybe like one kid that you're still recruiting. He doesn't have to do those. So that's a big advantage. And again, because all the things that I led in with, he's a persona that's different. If you don't know who Deion Sanders is and you follow football, that's kind of unusual, especially somebody that's over 40. It's almost impossible you don't know who he is from a personal standpoint. And that matters too. So not only does he have an advantage with recruits, parents, coaches, 7-on-7 coaches, lawyers, the local guy down at the street that has the hot dog stand. Everybody knows who he is. So somebody that you're walking down the street with, you might hear Deion's name, just conversation on the street. Doesn't matter if it's small town America. It doesn't matter if it's Memphis. It doesn't matter if it's Dallas. Doesn't matter where it's at. Somebody's probably talking about him in that town. He's going to be just fine with high school recruiting, in my opinion. Now, it's not ironclad because running a recruiting operation at Florida State, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, etc., it's a different animal. But with his personality and background, he has advantages that the vast majority of people couldn't even begin to understand, myself included. So I think he's going to be fine there. Secondarily, hiring assistant coaches. This is where a lot of young guys fail. They've improved from year 1 to year 2 at Colorado. It's a very small sample size. Don't argue with that at all. But I do think that he's improved and they've adjusted in different ways and they've put players in the right positions to be successful. One of them obviously talked about Travis Hunter. He plays both ways. He's a special player. That's great. But he's taking guys that aren't like Travis or even in the stratosphere and done a good job with making them productive players for the Buffaloes. He lets his coaches coach, he manages from the top, and he delegates. If you don't do that, you will run off coaches. Some guys, Bo Schembechler, Lou Holt, certain guys, they ran off a lot of the coaches they had because they always had to have their nose in it. They were still successful, but it's harder. Bowden and Paterno, those two ended up being, at their time, the reason they were so well off on the numbers and total wins is because their staff stayed. They let their guys coach. Deion's probably a little bit easier to coach based on what I've seen. I don't know for all the facts, but I have a feeling that once he gets a good coach, it'll be easier for him to keep somebody than some other guys because he's not going to grind on them quite as much. That's a very important factor. It's something that I've had a lot of conversations with people about. Certain coaches just aren't easy to work for. Saban was one of those guys too, obviously very successful and kind of a rare bird, but he's someone that grinded on guys and not everybody could handle it. It is what it is. How will he do without Shedeur wherever he goes? That's a great question. That's been brought up, and I don't think anybody knows. Here's why. Nobody's seen him try to develop anybody besides Shedeur, and that's his kid. It is the great unknown. I don't have an opinion on it because there's no reason to have an opinion. His son's done well, but he's raised him. How's he going to do with somebody that's a pain? I have no clue. The good news is, it sounds like Colorado is going to get Juju Lewis. We don't know who he is. Very good quarterback out of Carrollton, Georgia. He's been a kid I heard about since he was in 7th grade, and he's earned it. He's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen at the high school level in terms of accuracy. He's got a lot of moxie to him. If they get him, it'll be more of a plug-and-play guy. He fits the offense that Colorado runs, so they wouldn't have to change much. And he's a guy that, again, he's been doing it forever, so he's going to be understanding post-snap reads in a whole different way that most high school kids couldn't. So maybe that would work out. But overall, eventually, you're going to have to get somebody that you're going to have to develop like everybody else. We're going to have to wait and see. There is no one pure answer. What are some of the other unknowns about him that would be concerning if you're an AD, if you're a booster, if you're a player, if you're a parent of somebody that's involved in the program, whether it's a coach or a player? Here are some of the things that I worry about, but they may work out because Colorado's one thing, and I know it's FBS, but it's another to be at Florida State or at Texas A&M, et cetera, Southern Cal. Handling boosters, media, and more attention to not you, because, I mean, Deion really can't get a whole lot more attention, but to the program and what little things happen. It's one thing for something to go wrong at Colorado to get kind of smoothed over. That may not be the case at Texas A&M or Florida State or UCLA or any other major program that's got clout, historically speaking. It doesn't matter what they're doing now. Cachet and history in college football matter a lot, especially with the boosters. They don't always view things through a realistic viewpoint. I'm being very kind, having known several of them. So that's something I wonder about, and it would just be a personality fit with each person. Could cause rifts. It may work great. I don't know, but you're probably going to get a little bit of both. Second, his lack of experience in big games, being at the elite level, there's no way around it. That's a concern, but he has improved the Colorado program immensely in 1 year. So what we have is a good sign, but is it enough to say for sure that he's going to be great? Of course not. But considering what the coaching options are around the country, I imagine Deion's agent's going to have plenty of opportunities to field phone calls. What will his long-term offensive identity be? Shedeur, again, makes things a lot better. Deion's helped him, but the kid's very knowledgeable about the game, and you can tell that his brain operates a little bit differently than most, just based on how he throws the football and when and why. He doesn't put the ball in harm's way a lot. He's accurate, and he gives his guys a chance based on the trajectory he throws the football, all those different things. So they can run an open offense and not run the ball. Again, they're terrible at running the ball and get away with it. That is the exception, not the rule. So a concern I have is, would he devote to the running game if he was ever at Florida State or anywhere else and he needed to rely on it more? I think he would, because I don't think he cares how he would win. And if you're my age or anywhere similar, like the Cowboys and the 49ers back in those days, they always had good running backs. They always did. The 49ers in 94 had Ricky Waters, ended up running for over 10,000 yards in his career. Cowboys obviously had Emmitt Smith. So he's seen what it's like for an offense to be balanced and how successful it can be. So I think he would adjust, but there's still no evidence from anything I've seen or anybody else because he hasn't had to. So that needs to be addressed at some point down the line. What will his long-term offensive identity be? I'm going to say it's going to adjust year to year. I know that's a cop-out answer, but I think he will adjust to his quarterback and what he's got up front. Right now, he doesn't have the guys to run the ball. Seaton's going to be an NFL player, but he hasn't recruited a ton of kids out of the prep ranks. It takes years to get there. So we'll have to see. So I think he'll adjust. Will he be able to recruit in an elite league consistently every year? That means you're devoted to it. That means your lifestyle changes. That means that you give up some family time. I think he'll be fine with it. And again, not having to deal with the in-home visits, not dealing with that is huge. If he can get by just for a year or two and get top 10, top 12 classes somewhere, and they can have some success, again, Florida State, wherever, I think after that point, the floodgates would open, and it may even from year one. It depends on how much Deion devoted to it and the roster that he took over. That's very, very key. Every situation would be different. Right now, like if he was sitting in Norvell's chair right now, just to use it as an easy example, because I know the Florida State roster, he'd have to do something I don't like, because that's what Norvell is going to have to do. He's going to have to hit the portal because they're going to lose a lot of guys after this year. Plus, they're probably going to have several guys leave that didn't have to. You're not going to win with just high school recruits, and they're struggling on their high school ranks. He's going to have to go to the portal. If he goes somewhere and it's a rebuild, he'll do it that way. And over time, more high school kids, maybe an occasional junior college player mixed in. But I think he'll be fine with that. And I would expect top 10 classes pretty much every year. If not, I would be quite surprised. Finally here, would he jump at the 49ers, the Cowboys, or something like that at some point in his career? I could definitely see that. And I think the NFL itch will be there. Maybe he never leaves, but if I had to guess, he ends up being a head coach in the NFL at some point. Just my opinion. To do that, of course, that means he's done very well at the collegiate level. I think at some point, Deion will be a very good college head coach at a major program, and he's already turned Colorado around. Again, he's off to a good start, but this is only year 2 in the FBS. I think he needs several more years to prepare for the NFL if that's what he eventually wants to do, because that's such a different animal. You don't get to recruit players and just overnight improve your roster. It's play calling on game day is much more important at the NFL level, but I think he would be good at it. He just needs more seasoning like anybody else. And I think ultimately he'll be very good at the National Football League level, but I have a feeling that he enjoys dealing with the kids. I think more so than most people, by the way. And I think for that reason, at least another 5 years or so, I think he's going to be at the college level. I think that's minimum. Once he gets 62, 63, he's getting a little long in the tooth, doesn't want to jack with recruiting. I could see him going to Dallas. I could see him going to Washington or the Niners, someplace he's been before, or maybe even another like Steelers. That's a famed fortune, one of the most incredible franchises in sports history, really, whether it's domestic or international. Maybe he took that job, but he wouldn't just take any. I think he'd want a situation that could be beneficial to him. Just my opinion. With that, I hope you enjoyed my overview of Deion. I think he would be a unique hire for most people. In my opinion of him, has honestly changed a lot just in the last 2 to 3 months because they've earned it on the field. They were a team that I thought was going to win 4 to 5 games this year. That's about what FanDuel and everybody else had too. And they're already at 8-2. They've earned it. They've been more consistent. They're better in close games. And they just look more efficient in everything that they do overall, again, other than the running game. But they've made it work, even though teams know they can't run the ball. In some ways, that's even more impressive. So long term, I would not be surprised if he was Florida State's head coach or another major college program. But I do think he'll end up in the NFL before his career is over. Everybody have a good day. I appreciate it. You can catch me at FBScout_Florida. And please subscribe to this podcast. Hit that notification bell and hit that like button. Y'all have a good one.